Hi, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Long Ball Football Podcast, a weekly podcast by two brothers about all things football in Portugal. You're listening to myself, Albert, and as always, I'm joined by my brother Barney. How you doing, Barney? How's things?
Good. Very excited for this big episode. I think it's the first time we've could put a five-side team together with the amount of guests. I'm playing up top, by the way.
What a great point. As Barney alludes to, it's a big week. It's the final week of the Premier League season, so we're going out with a bang. We've got not one, not two, but three esteemed guests on the show. We're pulling out all the stops. And there's no bigger guest than the man himself, Mr. Tom Kundert. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction, Albert. Yeah, I'm feeling on top of the world. You might be able to guess why as well. Yeah, fantastic weekend and a great season for those of a sporting persuasion, of course. But really looking forward to just getting into it and talking about the whole season.
Very good. And Tom, where would you play in the five-a-side team?
I'll probably be five sides, not my forte, but probably be
Okay,
at the back. I'll probably be at the back,
fair
holding the
enough.
fort.
Me and Tom at the back, I think that's a nice, solid pairing. Andrew Batista is here as well. Andrew, it's been a little while. You've been away, but you're back now, and we appreciate your time. Thank you for coming, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'll be in goal. I'll answer that question now before Patrick takes my only position. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, everybody needs a goalie. That's fantastic. Do you know, the more I talk about it, the more I think we should actually do this. But yeah, of course, Patrick Ribeiro is on again. Patrick, again, same as what I said to Tom. Congratulations, sporting title winners, as we'll come on to. But yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, always a pleasure to be on. Glad to be on and kill off that little spell that sporting fans had after coming onto the podcast and speaking about a draw or a loss or something. This time we have a championship to talk about, so it's nice.
Absolutely.
It's nice to kill that one off.
Yeah, and are you happy to play up front with Barney? Is that your natural position?
I say we just leave Barney alone. I think he can do it all by himself up top. We'll do the engine room in the middle.
Playing three at the back and five aside. I absolutely love it. All right, gentlemen, let's get stuck straight into it because, of course, as we now know, Sporting have been crowned champions of the Primeira Liga for the 24-25 season. They went into the final day of the season knowing that a win against Vitória would be enough to crown them champions. They could have afforded to slip up, providing Benfica also dropped points. But I don't think anybody really wanted an end of the season that nervy, and the Sporting players delivered a 2-0 win, which secured them the title. Perhaps a little bit nervy at half-time being 0-0, but the two second-half goals meant that the title was won on their own terms, which I think was an appropriate ending. Tom, I'll come to you first. It's been a long season, and I think for Sporting it's been a season of kind of ups and downs. It did go right down to the wire, but when it came down to it, like I said, the players got the job done. And it's a historic title for Sporting because they are BICAMPEØES, two titles consecutively, the first time that's happened since the 50s. So yeah, it's a great occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. The chant at the end of the game in the stadium was straight away, "Bicampeão, bicampeão." This just means so much for Sporting fans because you have to remember that Sporting basically have been living in the shadow of Porto mostly for the last 30 years. But when it's not Porto, Benfica, especially since after Jorge Jesus went to Benfica and they had a period of ascendancy. And Sporting, it's only really when Ruben Amorim came that things started changing. And so this was an amazing day on Saturday, an amazing occasion, and to win three championships in 5 years. If you told that to Sporting fan about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I think when they had the Alcochete incident and the club was possibly at its lowest ebb ever. You just wouldn't believe it. But I think Sporting deserve it. I'm sure we'll get onto that. Even through trying to look through it through unbiased eyes, I think Sporting did deserve it. I think they were the best team overall. Although it was a very atypical season, of course, because after 11 games, 11 wins under Ruben Amorim, most people were thinking this season's going to be over. Sporting are going to be champions by March. I think if Amorim stayed, perhaps that would have happened. But then, of course, a whole lot of things happened. But yeah, a very, very happy ending on Saturday.
Absolutely, and I will come to the two sporting fans first. Patrick, you're obviously getting a bit used to winning titles at this point. That's now three in the last 5 years. But as Tom alluded to, that's the first two were with Amorim, and this title was a little bit different because in many ways it feels like this was almost about looking beyond Amorim and what would be possible without him. Obviously, next season will be the first full season without Amorim in charge, but I guess what all sporting fans will take heart from is the fact that they've now won a title in this kind of golden period that they had with a new manager, which I think is quite significant.
Yeah, it was important, and as you say, the moment Amorim comes to Man United, it obviously coincided with a very tricky spell for Sporting to get over with all the injuries and the pressure that was on the new manager in terms of João Pereira. Even when Rui Borges comes in, he's handed a tricky set of fixtures to settle in. I think 3 days after he's facing Benfica as well. So it in terms of a storm brewing, it was there for Sporting to have like a major collapse in the middle of the season. And even from the moment Rui Borges arrives as manager, there was still so many gaps in the team in terms of what injuries could do throughout the whole season, even suspensions as well to add to it. So it was a really tricky campaign for Sporting that required a lot of heart, a lot of grit and determination for them to cross the finish line. And of course, doing all that whilst Benfica are gathering more and more momentum as the season goes on as well. There was a lot of situations where things could have gone definitively wrong for Sporting, but it didn't. They managed to hold on, and it was an important victory, not just for the fact that obviously Sporting managed to do it without Amorim, but psychologically as well. I think a lot of those players will take a lot of lessons from this season about their self-belief and what they can and can't do. A lot of the youngsters that came in as well, you talk about the likes of Jean Simões, like what future do they have? Like he's found a spot in the squad now for sure, after some impressive appearances. So it is quite positive, but I think next season will of course be a little bit different. We did still see patterns of play that were under the Amorim style in terms of Rui Borges tried to implement his own style and then had to revert back to the three at the back. I don't think that will continue going into next season. So there are lots of changes and lots of things to still figure out. Of course, some key players will probably leave, as I'm sure we'll touch upon later in the show. So I'm expecting next year to be a difficult season as well, a different kind of challenge. But very happy to see Sporting do what they did, given the challenges that they had, because at times it was just looking at that midfield, for example, it was as depleted as it came. And to me personally, the midfield is the most important position in a football team. I think if your midfield isn't up to scratch, it's near impossible to win a game. But Sporting managed to do it and take it over the line. So yeah, very happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, you were watching this kind of title race from a neutral perspective, just like we were. Well, I don't know, as a Porto fan, if you felt neutral is the best word to describe it, but from an unbiased point of view. And I think for me, the last kind of few games when it's been really close, it's kind of just been keeping an eye on it to see who would have that edge and what would it be that team had to edge them ahead of the other team. In many ways, I feel like this season kind of came down to moments, when you look at Sporting getting the late winner against Gil Vicente through Eduardo Quaresma, and then Benfica not being able to get the win against Sporting in the Clásico. I mean, from your perspective, what is it that kind of got Sporting over the line ahead of Benfica in this one?
So I think, we look at Rui Borges coming into the team, and he did inherit the best set of players there, the best squad on paper by far in Portugal. But also it was a team that was used to doing something very different. It was used to like a system-centered sort of way of playing, whereas Rui Borges, as we know, is more of a man manager. And I think what surprised me the most is how tactically flexible he was and how he was able to get players to sort of or kind of trust his players to do things and find that little bit of individual brilliance, which is something that, Amoni had Gyökeres, who's his superstar because of how good he is, but it was very much a system that wasn't reliant on superstars. It was about the system and everyone sort of playing their part and it working. Whereas with Rui Borges, there's games where Trincão really stood out and he would score a goal or two. It was very important. Jenny, Gyökeres. So I think that was probably the difference was, you have the best squad of players and you should use them. You should try and put them in positions and play to their strengths where they will make the difference. And a lot of times I think they did in the more difficult games where they were struggling, maybe defensively or in the middle of the park. They were able to make that difference. So I think it was really that. And a lot of credit to Rui Borges because he did something that he's never won a league title before. He's had to come in to a very turbulent situation, steady the boat, and then start figuring out how to get points on the board with Benfica sort of right at his heels. So yeah, credit to him. I think he's going to stay on. I mean, we'll talk about his future, I'm sure, but he's got another year left on his contract. I'm sure he'll be knocking on the door, speaking to Varandas and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" But yeah, credit to him.
Yeah, I mean, it is important to remember that kind of real shock to the system that they had under João Pereira, where it was like you said, Tom. It looked like they were going to do it again under Amorim. The team looked amazing. Gyökeres was still there scoring, and it just looked like they were going to walk to another title. And then that really unstable period that kind of dented their title hopes. And Rui Borges is given. It's such an interesting thing to walk into because on the one hand, sporting is the dream job for every manager with the squad that they have and possibilities. But he came in at a time where there was a lot of nervousness and there was a lot of uncertainty, and so he did have a really big job, and I think that's why it is quite an impressive achievement from Rui Borges. Go on, Barney. I'll get your 2 cents on the game and on sporting itself because a special moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was obviously, I think, this game was always going to be important after the draw against Benfica, and I was really interested to see how they'd cope with it. And I cast my mind back to, I think it was Rui Borges' second game where he went back to Vitória, the sporting team, and I think it ended 4-4. I think Trincão got a late winner.
Yeah.
And couple that with Vitória's situation in this game where they wanted to try and win and to try and to finish above Santa Clara, which they didn't do. And I just think we saw, thinking back, he was at that point in January when the biggest thing he did was go to that four at the back, and then they had that little blip later on down the line where they got the free draws, and then it was at that point, wasn't it, where after those draws against AVS and Aruca that he did switch back to the three at the back, and as everyone sort of described really well, just letting the players go back to where they're perhaps more comfortable, where you can get the best out of them. And yeah, I don't know, I think it's like now it's happened. And I did always think it was going to happen, but now it happened. And looking back, it was just he's done really well. And I think sort of looking at this game individually as well, I think that's been the biggest thing, isn't it? Is that there has been pressure moments for Sporting. Even though if it did feel a little inevitable that this was going to happen, there still has been pressure moments. And I feel like he, as Andrew said, like he steadied the ship, and there is this calmness and there is this solidity about the way his teams play, and yeah, it's a really, really incredible job and a really tough job as well, because I think when Amarin left, everyone was saying, I think we all said it on this podcast at one point, that it's the hardest thing to do to walk into a team that's doing really well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so a really good result, and I thought this game was going to be hard, and like I said, it just played out really nicely for them, and I think that sort of describes how Sporting have done under Rui Borges.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, as a couple of you have alluded to, I think obviously it's really important for the team to enjoy the win. And of course, there's the Taça de Portugal final coming up, which is another huge game and an opportunity that I think Rui Borges will really relish, to do something that even Ruben Amorim couldn't do, and do the domestic double, which I think would be an amazing achievement, not just for the club, but I think for Rui Borges to kind of set himself apart. So obviously an important game coming up. I do think, though, there is a still very valid question about the future and what the future will be for Sporting, because like you said, Andrew, the manager has a 1-0 deal at the club. And as you guys have pointed out, this season, whilst it has been very good, has kind of been maybe a hybrid season. Has been playing Amorim's system with Amorim's players, changing a little bit, coming back. So there are still question marks about what the future will hold and whether the club is really prepared to go all in on Rui Borges and say, okay, you are the man that we're now going to build the club around in the way that we did around Amorim. I mean, Tom, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that about what the future will be, and of course an incredible achievement to win this league, but what does the club need to do now in order to kind of consolidate that and keep growing and keep improving in the way that they did when they backed Amorim at the beginning?
Yeah. Well, I think they have to back him, don't they? After winning the league. I mean, everyone's touched on it. I agree with everything everyone said about Borges there. You can't really underestimate the job he has done. It was difficult. He didn't lose a game, a league game while he's at sport, and he had to go to the Dragão, he had to go to the Luz, the toughest games in the league, had to go to Vitória, and he didn't lose at all. And just a couple of the points there, I'll just reiterate, which I think Barney said really well as well. I think he's just really composed and really focused the whole time through. He's obviously not as charismatic as Amorim. It's not as charismatic as many managers, I don't think you wouldn't call him, but I think his composure and also the fact he did, I think like Andrew alluded to, he did kind of have this connection. You could see that immediately. It was such a contrast to João Pereira. He managed to establish a connection to the players, and they seemed immediately to respect him. And that they were just those are two key factors really, which allowed him to take advantage of this very good squad and go forward, and get them over the line. Because let's face it, if Sporting hadn't won this league, it would have always been looked on a little bit like the league they threw away. They were so superior to the opposition, to their rivals at the start of the season. They'd won last season at a canter as well. It would have been, I think it would have been seen like a huge mischance for Sporting, and maybe Sporting slipping back into those old Sporting ways of just being not ever really able to to really challenge for the league seriously right until the end. As far as so I think they will. I'm pretty sure Fernandes will back him to the hilt now. He's got to. I agree with again with what Andrew said. Is Amorim was such a system manager, and he was so specific. The way he built the squad, that's going to have to really go out the window, and he's going to be able to. Rui Borges is going to be able to get the players he wants to use, his system. I mean, this huge problem Sporting had in midfield this season, you could actually say it was a little bit down to Amorim, because at the start of the season, Sporting had basically three midfielders for two positions. They had Bragança, they had Hulman, obviously, and who's the other one?
Morita.
Morita, exactly. They were basically the three first choice midfielders. And even at the start of the season, I remember people saying when Amorim was still there, they think, it's taking a bit of a risk. We obviously had Pedro Gonçalves who could drop back if need be. And then what happens? Gonçalves injured, 5 months out. Morita injured virtually the whole season. It's just a disaster. And I think another I think string to the bow of Rui Borges, a really brilliant tactical move he did, was moving the Bast from centre back into midfield. Just it made such a difference that he just got better and better. It's curious because if you remember from Vitória, he did exactly the same thing with Manu Silva. Who was a centre back, converted it into a holding midfielder. It was so impressive. He ended up getting a move to Benfica. Unfortunately, got injured. So yeah, I think they are going to have to be moves. Obviously, I think they're going to have to bolster the midfield. Like Pat said, João Simões, I'm really excited to see how well he does, because he really impressed me, before he unfortunately got injured. Basically, all of Sporting's midfielders, they had some kind of curse on them this season. They all got injured. So yeah, basically to answer your question, I think Fernandes has to has to invest now in Borges. Said, you've done a great job here. Now, this is your season. Tell me what you need. Sporting are going to have quite a bit of money in the bank. They've got Champions League. They're going to sell Gyökeres for many, many millions. They might,
Hmm.
they might even sell, one or two more.
Hmm.
So, he definitely have the funds to be able to build a squad in his own image. And so, yeah, let's see. Let's see. It's going to be an important summer, I think, for Sporting.
Absolutely. I got Patrick from a player's point of view as well, because we are expecting a turnover of players. As Tom says, Joker is most likely to be leaving, and maybe one or two others as well. I think when you see the goal scorers in this game, Pedro Gonçalves and Victor Jokeres, those kind of two talismans of the Ruben Amorim era. A very real chance that at least one, if not both of them, won't be there next season. So, what do you think the player turnover will look like in the summer? And it could be like Tom says, it could be a positive, but obviously it's the nature of sporting is that it's a selling system.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Sporting, but everyone else. I feel like if you go right through the league, there will be right up until the final hours of the transfer market, you can expect any top player to leave, either Sporting or a Benfica or a Porto.
Mm.
It's just the way the cake forms in Portugal. Um, but yeah, for sure, I think Gyökeres is the main the main player who we all expect to leave. I don't know whether we have a replacement for him already, given that we Sporting were very adamant on the signing of Conrad Harder last summer. So
Hmm.
perhaps we've got the replacement right there ready. Maybe we then need a Conrad Harder replacement just to back him up. Um, but for sure, there'll be a few key players that will leave. I think we talk about even centre backs. If Rui Borges is to revert to his typical 4-4-2, 4-4-1-1 type formation, then the five, six centre backs of Sporting has for four positions doesn't make sense. So maybe we cash in on a Diamande or a Inacio.
Hmm.
So there'll be changes there. I think Sporting obviously are champions. Um, in Portugal, there's always the temptation to cash in on that and go for a wholesale and sell everyone uh, at the largest fee possible. There's obviously a danger in that you lose a lot of key players all at once, and you don't necessarily want to do that. We had the president today saying that he wants to go for back to back to back titles, so for the third one in a row. And I feel like clubs as business models sometimes have to remember the sporting element of it and try to keep the squad as competitive as possible as well. So there will be a few key players that they will just have to say like, be patient. Next year you'll get your move, or try their best to hold on to them. And perhaps there are some players that you can do that with. I think Pedro Gonçalves is a player who's perhaps overdue a move. He's been brilliant
Hmm.
for a number of seasons, but he's also a player who strikes me to have his heart in the right place. And he has had an absent season this year, so maybe next year
Hmm.
he chooses to stay. Trincão is a player who's very similar.
Hmm.
And these are very good profiles to have in and around the club. So although I do expect, of course, Gyökeres to leave and a few others, I hope that Sporting don't stretch themselves and overcommit to selling and completely rebranding the whole squad. Because as you say, it's a fantastic squad that we have. If the pressure's not there to sell, then you want to keep the squad together as much and as best as possible.
Yeah, and I'm conscious I don't want to bring negativity into it when we're talking about a title win for Sporting, of course. So, yeah, definitely want to focus on the positives. Andrew, I do want to ask you about Vitória actually, because obviously Sporting are the main attraction from this game, but I do think Vitória's result is worth noting on because, of course, the elephant in the room is that it's a loss, but ultimately meant that they don't qualify for Euro. I just want to get your thoughts on, well, one, how damaging is that for them as a club and even their season as a whole, to finish sixth behind a team like Santa Clara, although, having a difficult season themselves, losing their manager to Sporting, maybe it wasn't the easiest season overall.
That'll probably be the reason they give. They'll say,
Mm.
look, it's a disappointing season, but we lost our manager after a very good start with Rui Borges. And also, they played a lot of games early on. I mean, I remember when we
Yeah.
recorded a podcast, it was maybe a month into the season, and they played like 10 games or
Yeah.
something absurd like that with all the Conference League stuff. As for this game, yeah, they needed to perform better. I mean, I was sort of looking into it. They had an XG of zero point 0.0. I mean, that's dreadful.
I don't think you need
That's
to understand
dreadful.
the XG to know that that's not good.
Yeah, zero point 0.0 is as bad as it gets. So this was the kind of game where Sporting almost made it difficult for themselves. They should have, buried Vitória in this game because I don't
Mm.
think they were really that good. But also you could tell Gyökeres was desperate to score. He had like 5 shots on target, and you could tell he wanted to score because he knew it was his last game, at home. So I think a lot of times he was sort of taking the ball and doing things he normally wouldn't do. He probably would have passed or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
but instead taking shots. And it was a great atmosphere and a very difficult atmosphere to perform when you're the away team because
Hmm.
the images and the way the fans were. It was really great to see. But yeah, Vitória, a lot to sort of think about for next season. Sixth is disappointing. I mean, Santa Clara had a great season. If they didn't, then maybe they'd still finish fifth. But you don't want to sort of rely on that to sort of perform. And they'll probably sell a few players anyway because that's their thing.
Yeah, I saw them already linked with a few players from the second division, which seems like a kind of Victoria special that's worked before.
Yeah.
So don't knock it if it doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, we'll move on to Benfica, but just to reiterate and to end this section by reminding everybody that this is, a historic second consecutive league title for Sporting, the first time they've done that in 71 years, and a really incredible achievement. So to all our Sportingista listeners, a big congratulations from us. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what happens next season. I do want to talk about Benfica, though, of course, and their game against Braga. Gentlemen, I know an awful lot about this game because I chose to spend my Saturday afternoon at the local Portuguese cafe, which they told me they were going to be showing both games. I turned up, and of course, the Benfica owner was only showing the Benfica game on the TV. So I ended up watching a 1-1 damp squib while Sporting won the title. But alas, a fairly interesting game. Anyway, obviously from Benfica's perspective, they were waiting for Sporting to slip up, and it never happened. So I don't think the game ever really sprung into life. They conceded a penalty early on, which was a pretty controversial penalty in my opinion. And even though Braga ended the game with 10 men, they were only able to make it 1-1. So a real kind of anticlimactic end to the season for Benfica. But Andrew, to come back to you first on Benfica. I think I said it in the intro to the Sporting section. This season was really about moments for me. And while this game particularly, though it was the last game of the season, didn't turn out to be that defining moment for Benfica, I think you can look back at games like the Lisbon derby, and those were really when Benfica had the opportunity to win the league, and they didn't. But maybe that's a little bit harsh because in many ways you could say that they did well enough to get themselves into a position where they even had a chance to win the league on the final day of the season, although I don't think that will be any consolation to the Benfica fans.
I don't think it will. I'm not sure if this was the case of Braga being good or Benfica being quite poor. I didn't think they played that well, Benfica.
Mm,
They looked like a team that didn't. They never really thought that they'd win the title on the last day. They just didn't seem sort of energized and sort of
mm,
up for it. Um, Obviously, Sporting had the head-to-head, so maybe they were a bit sort of demoralized. But as the manager, Bruno Lage, you have to try and get them to sort of, really be up for it and do everything they can, and it just didn't feel that way. Firstly, not starting Di Maria, that was a bit baffling to me.
mm,
I know he's pretty old, so you can't play every game, but it's the last push. You've got to sort of do everything you can. You saw the difference he made as soon as he came on. They looked a lot better. Aktoglu dropped one of his worst performances. I thought he played really
yeah,
poorly. I don't want to be sort of mean,
I
but
think it's fair.
it was a very bad performance from him. And Truban had to pull off some good saves as well. And and,
Hmm.
and I think it was Benfica weren't playing very well, but Braga, who I've been critical of the season for sure, they did play really well, and they limited Benfica to just the 2 shots on target. Pavlidis was trying his best, and the goal Pavlidis scored was a pretty good goal, although I'm sure the goalkeeper will kind of, you know, learn from that because his positioning was a bit um, poor in that one. But yeah, I don't. I think watching that game, and then there's some other games during the season where if they had to win the league title, I would have been like, that's a really poor league
Yeah,
title. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
It would have been sort of disappointing because I don't feel like they're the best team in the country. I don't feel like they've shown that. And there's a lot of issues with that team. I don't really particularly like watching this Benfica team. They don't sort of excite me that
I'm
much.
shocked.
Yeah, well, and biases aside, I don't sort
No,
of like
sure,
how they play.
sure.
And yeah, it would have been disappointing if they did win this league title.
Yeah, it was a very strange game. Bizarrely, I thought Braga were the better team when they went down to 10 men. Very strange
Yeah,
game. And
true.
and, and Benfica played like a team, in my opinion, that just kind of knew that it wasn't going to happen, and they had to kind of put on this front to look like they were chasing something down. But yeah, when they get the penalty early on, I think they just knew it was
They were
game
going
over.
through
So
the motions. Yeah, they were going through
exactly
the
that.
motions almost. Yeah.
Exactly that. Tom, I mean, you've watched a lot of Benfica teams over the years, and we are used to Benfica being leading the pack and in terms of being at the top of the league, but also having the best players and the best manager and all that kind of stuff. I think it's fair to say that this season they've ended up in a bit of a mess. In preparation for this show, I was looking back. I'll be honest with you guys. I had to remind myself that Roger Schmidt was Benfica manager this season. I had to double check. I was about to say something like, "Oh, it's funny that Bruno Lage has been in charge of the whole season and it's been a bit inconsistent." But no, Roger Schmidt was in charge at the beginning of the season, so it has been a bit of a mess for them. The squad I find to be full of good players, full of very good players, but still quite messy. I think it's something that me and Patrick talked about last week about the tactics that Bruno Lage has when he's chasing the game is not necessarily to trust his system, but that just to start throwing players onto the pitch like Artur Cabral and Belotti. So it's been, yeah, a tough season for Benfica. Like I said to Andrew, in some ways, I think Lage deserves some credit for the stability that he's tried to bring and that he's managed to get a lot of consistency out of the team in the second half of the season and get the best out of some of the players like Pavlidis. But I think there was just always these problems and this mess behind the scenes that were just holding them back a bit.
Yeah, I think that Benfica were it's really their backroom staff, isn't it? You can say, which has brought instability to that club in the last couple of seasons. Rui Costa, we all love him as an ex-player, and
Mm.
Portugal great, Benfica great, but his time as Benfica president has really been very chaotic, and it's very difficult to see some kind of guiding strategy or plan, which is following. He just doesn't seem to have one, and it's very scattergun. Even this, for instance, keeping on Roger Smith was just a huge risk. Everyone could say at the end of the season he was
Mhm.
just, persona non grata among Benfica fans. They just had had enough of him completely. You could say that Rui Costa showed strength, in keeping him on and sticking to his principles, but that was destined to go very wrong very quickly if results didn't go their way. And he just lasted 4 games. I think first two away games, they lost one, they drew one, and that was
Mhm.
it. That was the end of him. So immediately you've got the team in a bit of turmoil right at the start of the season. And then just the transfer policy is just all bit all over the place, really. Even this Christmas, this January transfer window, another four or five signings. Some of them a little difficult to understand. Like Brumer, a very good player, Brumer. I rate him, but they had, I think, three, right-sided wide players, and they went and got Brumer as well. And how are you going to fit Brumer into the team when you've got Sheldrup, who's been getting lots of Benfica fans have been calling for him to be used more. Prestiani, who's hardly been used. I think he cost 12 million. Whenever he
Mhm.
has been used, it's actually looked pretty good. In pre-season, he was fantastic, but he hasn't, he just hasn't had a look in. And so yeah, it's just all a bit too scattergun. Like you said, they have got some great players there. And I actually think I feel a bit sorry for Bruno Lage because I actually think he did a good job this season because
Mhm.
they were in a bit of chaos really when he came into the team. And if you look at it, he just got the results. The football wasn't great for the most part, but he got results. Good Champions League campaign as well. And won the Taça da Liga, and who knows, maybe they win the Portuguese Cup as well. So, in terms of, getting results, I think he's done enough perhaps to deserve another chance next season. But the guy I think who's really going to be feeling the heat, of course, is Rui Costa with the presidential elections coming up in
Mm.
October. And unless Benfica have a really, a solid start to next season, I'll be very surprised if he stays on as their president. If he puts himself up as a candidate again. Just while we're on Benfica, I just want to one word. I think one player is just I think he's a bit unlucky in some way, and that is that Pavlidis.
Mm.
He's been really fantastic. If you look at it, 60 games this season, 31 goals, and in the
Yeah.
29 goals, and yeah, actually that's a couple of goals for Greece. So he scored
They all
29
count.
goals. Yeah, 29 goals for Benfica, 11
Mm.
assists. And if you remember, he was getting quite a lot of stick at the start of the season because he wasn't scoring very many. But yeah, he's really proved to be, I'd say, their star player. He's outperformed even Di Maria. And
Mhm.
and who can forget, of course, in the derby, the crunch game, he the Benfica goal is just an absolutely magnificent piece of play by him. He kind of morphed into Maradona for for a
Yeah.
little while there, waltzed past, left five Sporting defenders on the floor, basically set up their goal. So yeah, he's had a great season, and the reason I said I feel a bit sorry for him is because, of course, there's another guy called Victor Gyökeres in this league who really casts every other attacker in the shadow, because he's too good for Portugal, basically. And
Yeah.
so people aren't talking that much about Pavlidis. If Victor Gyökeres didn't exist, I think people would be giving him a lot more praise because he certainly deserves it.
Yeah, and certainly I think definitely a real positive for Benfica and a player that in the future they can look to build around. Patrick, I don't know what you think about where Benfica go next because there are positives. Like I think Bruno Lage was a positive, like Pavlidis is a positive, and of course they always have young players like Araujo playing, and they have a lot of great players in the squad. Anatoly Trubin amongst them. So yeah, I just wonder where you kind of think the work needs to be done to get them to the next level because there's more potential in this team.
Yeah, I think personally, I think Lage has done really well, especially to recover. They have failed in key moments during the season in terms of really asserting their dominance where Sporting have missed, where a lot of Benfica fans would have said that's where we lost the title. But it's important to always see the trajectory in which Benfica undertook. It wasn't that long ago that Bruno Lage was having to um, try to calm fans down and say that he's trying his best, etc.
Hmm.
And so when you look at Benfica, where they were and where they are now, it's a completely different feel, I think. And at least for himself, professionally as a manager, I feel like he's done brilliantly to get the Benfica fans on side finally. And I think I'll just lead on from Tom. I think he needs a bit more support and clarity from the guys upstairs. I think they need to really look at their squad more clinically and clear things up because at the moment, you've got key players that are going to be there and deserve to be there, such as Pavlidis has been brilliant, Kerem Aktürkoğlu is a fantastic player, even Florentino, Thiago Araújo when fit. There are key players there, but there are other areas where because of the wealth of options and the constant stream of players, it's like Bruno Lage still doesn't know like where the other pieces fit basically, and it's almost like there's uh, like an abundance of options in certain areas, and neither the players that he has are quite pushing the needle for him to say right, this player deserves to play alongside a Pavlidis or a Kerem, etc.
Hmm.
And I think that's where the work starts for Benfica. It's ensuring they know what players go ahead into the next season, what players are, as you say, they can play about with the market and let go, and start building a more solid 11 again, a more current string of options and names, so that they can have a bit more continuity and build a bit more team spirit. But it should be an eventful summer. Obviously, they've got the Club World Cup coming up as well, which I don't know how much time that's going to rob them of. They've got that constant Di Maria drama right now. Nobody knows if he's going to stay or go. He's obviously going to leave at the end of the season, but when at the end of the season does he compete in a tournament? Does it not? There's obviously elections, and in a time like this, where Benfica lose a title, of course, there will be lots of noise in a club like Benfica because Benfica expect to win the title every season, and there will be people who will be trying to benefit from that moment and pose a challenge to someone like Rui Costa, who's in a spot of privilege as the president. So it will be a noisy summer, I think, for Benfica. I don't think it needs to be that noisy. I think they can hopefully try to contain it and just be smart and clean up the squad, which is a good squad. We're not talking about a massive overhaul project at all. They just need to be a bit more professional and resourceful with what they have. So, and we'll see.
Yes, maybe a slightly less chaotic Benfica, which almost sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but like I said, some real potential for them to do great things next season. Barney, we were texting earlier about the news that came out today about Braga, which is that Carlos Carvalhal is going to be leaving Braga at the end of the season. And guys, please feel free to jump in on this as well, because I'm interested to get all your thoughts. But I feel like we've spoken so much about Carvalhal, and the question has always been, has he done enough? Is he doing a good job? Is he underachieving? Well, he is leaving now. I don't know how you feel, because I almost now suddenly, after most of the season saying perhaps they can do better, now that I've seen the news he's leaving, I almost start to feel like maybe he's been hard done by.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like he very much. I think this season is perfect example, really, of that. He's really very much really reached his limit with Braga, as far as I'm concerned.
I think I agree with that, definitely. Yeah.
Because they're very happy to ruin Benfica's potential party, but they ruined their own party a couple of weeks ago, and like it's because like I said about a month or two ago, there was a real opportunity for them to finish ahead of Porto. Everything that's gone on with Porto, and they just did not capitalize. And it's a couple of bad results, and I think that is Carvajal's time at Braga, and both times, it always seems to be that sort of that ceiling that you just can't break past. And it was literally on the plate for them this season, and they weren't able to do it. I think to his credit, I think he got the squad back together for the second half of the season. They were a bit of a shambles. He sort of worked out a strong team, went back to sort of his what he likes to do, and there was some good performances from players. I think he's bringing Chisumba into the team has been a really good stroke from him. Hornacek as well, at the goalkeeper, although they sold Mateus. And I was like, I like Roger Fernandez under Carvajal. I think he looks really good on that right hand side. And of course, Petrao had a couple of moments himself. But I still come back to this feeling that this was a wasted opportunity for Braga this season. I think they have reached their limit with Carvalhal, and I do think they need to change the manager to potentially make that next step.
The thing I always settle on with Braga is I just feel like sometimes we always fall into this trap with Braga of thinking that it's just around the corner. They just need to get in the right manager and get the right group of players together, and suddenly they'll just make this kind of everything will click, and there'll be this surge towards the top three, and they're on the brink of building this, like they could be the next, they can make it a big four and all this kind of stuff. And I do wonder sometimes whether maybe we're asking a bit too much. I don't know just how big the disparity in finances is between those top three clubs and them. I don't know how much of an unrealistic expectation that is to ask of a club like Braga. But I think ultimately what it comes down to for me is that I always feel like they should be looking forward and looking up and looking like they're making attempts to kind of what's the best way of putting it? Like they should always be looking for the potential underdog who's going to take it to the next level, which is I thought they were doing when they signed that manager that they sacked after 3 games, whose name I forgot. That guy. Do you know what I mean? When they signed the young manager who's going to take it to the next level.
Yeah, Sousa.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Yes, but it never quite happens, and I think top 4 solidity for a club like Braga is still a great achievement. And I think Carvajal has achieved that a few times now. I think he does deserve credit for it. But look, let's see what they do, because they could do something really exciting, and they could have a really exciting season to come.
And Moutinho signed for another year. I saw that.
Well,
They
that's
should
what
put that
that's
out on
what
the same
matters.
day. Didn't they?
Yeah. Go on, Andrew. I feel like we've spoken about Carvajal a lot. What do you think about it?
I have spoken about him quite a lot. I think, Barney put it really well there when he said that he's reached his level with this Braga team, and if you can't take advantage of this poor Porto season, and I hope it's the last poor Porto season for a while, if you can't take advantage of this, then it shows, what the maximum that he can achieve, and you just need more than that. And I think it'll be very telling to see what Antonio Salvador does next. Who he decides to bring in. Is it one of the managers that have done well? Is it Vasco Marques? Is it João Pereira? Who do they go for? I want to see this group of players, the younger players, what they do with that group of players. Obviously, João Moutinho is still around, and you need that sort of experience. Ricardo Horta as well. But there's a good group of players there that could do something really great under the right manager. And I'm not sure Carvajal is that guy. I didn't really think he would be even earlier in the season. It always just seemed like something was off. He's a very good manager, and he's achieved some great things with Braga. He'll always be fondly remembered by the club. And even, there's some great games, great performances over the years during his time there. So he's a very good manager. But yeah, I think that's kind of it for him. And they need to look past him and try and reach for something more, reach a little higher. And especially now that they've been able to get this good group of players together, they need to really go for it.
Absolutely. Well said. And before we do want to spend a lot of time talking about the relegation battle, but Andrew, while we've got you, just as a resident Portista, I did think it was worth just very quickly talking about Porto, because obviously I know their 2-0 win against Nacional didn't mean a lot for the league. Although, as I said a few times in the build up to the end of the season, I did think there was a big difference between finishing third and fourth for Porto, and that was secured. But yeah, I mean, I know, sorry, it's to put you on the spot, but just, yeah, your thoughts on if you wanted to give like a final word on Porto this season, then yeah, please go for it.
So I would say if we had to finish fourth, it would have been the end of the world in Porto. It would have
Yes.
been, the media would have been all over them. Like that is a big deal
Yeah.
to finish fourth. So he had to finish third. He was able to do that with some help from Braga, thankfully. And I think it's important now that he has this summer, and he kind of really looks at the team, and decides who's going to stay, who's not going to stay. There's some positions that need to improve. But there's some positions that there's already very promising players. Obviously, Samu's done really well. He's second top goal scorer, 20 goals behind Gyökeres, which is ridiculous. 20 goals. I can't believe that. But yeah, so he's done really well. Rodrigo Mora obviously is everyone's talking about him. Whether or not he stays, there's already talk of him going to all kinds of teams. You always expect that with a sort of star player like that, or a very young, very talented player like Rodrigo Mora. But there's players that there's been a question mark over them for a while now, like Pepe and a few others. So I think Anselmi just needs to sort of take his time this summer and really look at what he has. But I like what I've seen. I like that it's more system centered, because I think that's what we need right now. And I think that's sort of the way things are at Porto money wise. You need to focus on system if you can't buy your way out of problems, and we can't buy our way out of problems like we used to.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, again, I'm not sure if Porto fans would agree with me, but it feels like for me the most important thing they can do this summer is keep hold of Rodrigo Mora, and I would argue for the player as well, that it's important for him to stay. But yes, we'll see. All right, I do want to talk about the relegation battle, because it was, it did go down to the last day of the season. On the final game, all four teams could have potentially survived, depending how results went, although Boavista could have only hoped for a playoff place, but still, everyone had something to play for. And I think we were all expecting this kind of big, dramatic relegation battle final day with twists and turns, scores going ahead of each other, blah, blah, blah. As it turned out, it was a bit of a damp squib. All four teams involved lost, and the standings stayed the same as they had been the previous week, with Estrela Amadora surviving by the skin of their teeth in 15th place. They were playing the Primeira Liga for another season, despite losing 4-0 to Estoril. AVS finished the season in 16th, and they will play the relegation playoff doubleheader against Vizela for the second division. And unfortunately, we say goodbye to Farense and Boavista, who both ended in the automatic relegation playoffs. Tom, I'm going to come to you first with a very simple question. To you, what does it mean for the Primeira Liga to lose a club like Boavista?
Yeah, it's a shame, really. Both of those clubs, Boavista and Farense, they're kind of clubs who you think almost belong in the first division, in the top flight in Portugal. I know Farense, they've had a bad time the last few years, but also to be a representative of the Algarve, of course, who
Absolutely.
there's no other representative right now in the top flight. So it's a shame they've gone down. Yeah, and Boavista, of course, one of the most historic clubs in Portugal, just 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, wasn't it? They were champions and did well in the Champions Leagues for a few seasons, and they've just have never really been able to recover from their fall from grace. And it's a shame this season. I watched quite a lot of their games, and it's such a shame because you could tell that it was a terrible team in terms of quality. It's a terrible squad, in terms of quality, but they really had a lot of heart. I think both under Bacci at the start of the season,
Yeah.
and then and even here at the end, in Stuart Baxter, that was a bit of a left field roll of the dice, wasn't it, to try and save them. And so many games they just managed to claw a draw, and you thought, how have they done that, or to even get one or two wins. And these last few games have actually played quite well, I think. And it's a shame just to see, when they really haven't been given a chance, by the back. It's not really you can't really blame the players. I don't think you can blame the coaches this season. It's just the club is in such a chaotic space, such a chaotic situation. What was it, 3 or 4 transfer windows? They couldn't sign anyone, and it's quite amazing, really. They've managed to survive in the top flight, for the last 2 or 3 seasons, when they've always, threatened to be going down. Had situations when, they haven't had electricity at the stadium because they haven't paid the bills. The medical staff, I think, went on strike for some time because, they weren't receiving their wages. And yet the players, every time they stepped out on that pitch, they seemed to give it all. And of course, the fans, the fans, that really is a shame for Portuguese football, that they're going to, hopefully not for too long, but that's a fan base which really deserves to be in the top flight. And so yeah, it's a shame, but that's you make mistakes and you pay the price for them. And so I just hope that they're back, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I think the images after the game were quite, I thought, said a lot. There was real sadness, not just from the fans, naturally, and like you say, Tom, I think you're right to point out a really strong fan base in the stadium away at Arouca. I think they sold all their away tickets, and they were really well supported, which I think says a lot about the club. But also from the players. I mean, the image that struck me was of Robert Bojanic on the field of play after the pitch, crying his eyes out, like really devastated. And I thought that was quite an interesting image, because I've always thought of Robert Bojanic as a player that should have left maybe even 2 seasons ago, a player that was too good for that team, and that you could even argue was kind of due a move, and maybe he'd been let down by the club. That I know there was some situation with an American club where he could have left, been let down, and yet even he was still so committed to this cause that he was, bereft after the game. I thought it said a lot, and I take absolutely no pleasure in Boavista's relegation, despite what some people may believe from my previous comments. But no, in all seriousness, it really is a shame to see them go down. Andrew, I know we were talking on not on the podcast, but in messages about you're actually quite familiar with Stuart Baxter, so I'd be interested to get your thoughts on him. It was, when he was brought in, it was mission impossible, really, wasn't it? He had 5 games, and you could tell, in those final 5 games, they would have said, "Look, we need you to win these 3," and he won 2 of the 3, and perhaps they were a little bit unlucky with, Farense and AVS both getting wins that they had no right to get last week. So in some sense, he did what he could, but it was always going to be a pretty impossible task.
Yes, definitely. I mean, just before I talk about Stuart Baxter, don't forget they also brought in Lito Vidigal, and they
Of
thought
course.
he might save the day, and predictably he
Big
was
win
there
against
for
Farense. Big win against Farense.
big win, yeah. But yeah, so Stuart Baxter, that was a very random appointment. When I saw that, I was kind of like, well, what's going on? It was very sort of surprising. Yeah, so I sort of grew up in South Africa, and he won a few league titles sort of around the time when I was growing up. So I did watch a lot of sort of Baxter ball, as they call it in South Africa, and he's almost the perfect kind of manager for this sort of situation because he's very he'll set up very defensively, although he's quite tactically sort of adaptable. He will. It is about a defensive structure and then a lot of transitional play
Mhm.
and also a lot of discipline. So I think you need someone like that can kind of um, sort of get the team playing in a more conservative way. I mean, especially in Liga 2, where if you can play on transition and be defensively sound, you can do pretty well.
Mhm.
So we'll see how he does. But I thought the last few games that he's been in charge, they played better. They did look really sort of up for it, especially in this game, even though it was against Oroco, who sort of really still scored quite a few goals. They still managed like 20 shots. They
Mhm.
they were really trying and they had some good chances. The question is whether or not they're able to keep these players. Does Bozanic stay? I don't know.
He
I'd be
shouldn't. In
shocked.
my opinion, he
He
shouldn't.
shouldn't.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Can they keep these sort of players that they have? That's the important thing. And then if you keep them all, can you pay them? While they're down in Liga Deutsch, how much can you really pay them? They can barely pay the bills, and so
Yeah.
how do you do that? And it wouldn't be the first time we've seen a sort of team that goes through financial difficulty go down and maybe take a bit longer to come up. And sometimes they don't come back up. Like
Mhm.
Beira disappeared. Laid
What
off
I was
coach. Don't
saying
want that
earlier
to
was
happen.
look at what how Passos Ferreira is struggling. Look at
Yeah,
how
Patrick Kundert.
Portimonense are struggling.
Mm,
Even Maritimo not doing as well as they could do. So this isn't some situation where you just go down and it's not like in the Premier League where you go down to the
yeah.
Championship, you've got so much more money than everybody else, and you've got this huge squad. This could be very tough. So obviously we. With all sincerity, wish Boavista all the best, and I do hope we see them back in the Primeira Liga very soon because that's a very important club that I think we need in the top division.
Can I just cut in just one more thing on Boavista?
Yeah, go on. Is this justice for Vidigal?
No, no. I was gonna. It's really sad for me because obviously we started this podcast, and that
Hmm.
the one sort of thing that sort of shone out was this one team that won the league that wasn't the big three, right? And
Yeah,
being this
yeah.
Club Boavista, and I think we fell in love with them quite early, and this was around the time that Gerard Lopez had taken over, had bought Boavista, and they signed players like Albert Barney on loan from Bordeaux, the club that Gerard Lopez had also signed, and Angel Gomez had come from Lille when he was had dealings with Lille, and that felt good, right? That felt um, exciting. That felt these were amazing players playing for this this smallish team in this league, um, and then and then it all goes tits up, right? And the financial problems hit, and it gets worse and worse. And as you guys have already described, like it was incredible that they stayed up. It was amazing that this kept happening. And I guess the point I'm making is that obviously Gerard Lopez is a complete crook, and he's ruined this club. And I just wonder, we've seen a few things going on with Rio Ave as well now. Like maybe it's just a word of warning for those clubs, and maybe that these Portuguese clubs are a little susceptible to potential people coming in and doing this to them. Um, I don't have a clear point about it all, but I think the point I'm trying to make is just that I do feel really sad about it all, and I think that Jared, a man like Gerard Lopez to come in and do this to a club like a historical club like Boavista,
Mhm.
it's just such a shame, and yeah, I was certainly a little hoodwinked in the beginning that this was a positive thing, his him being involved in that club, but no, it was a complete disaster, and it's such a shame.
Yeah, they are certainly a cautionary tale. I think I'm not sure how it exactly works, but the LPFP, I don't know if they should do more due diligence with, owners coming in and buying up teams, especially now that the Portuguese league seems to be more attractive to investors and these kind of guys that this the
Mhm.
multi-club stuff with Rio Ave, etc. So yeah, that's a good point.
Just to finally beat the allegations. This is a moment for the video only version of the podcast, but I have my Boavista jersey on. Just to, yeah, that's a club I got a lot of love for. Let's move on quickly to a couple of the other teams involved. Farense. I mean, for me, the team that I think put up the best fight on the final day, as they, at one point they did come from behind to draw 1-1 with Santa Clara, but they couldn't hold on. They did end up losing 2-1, and that was a real shame because that confirmed their relegation. Patrick, I don't know how much Farense you've seen this so far this season, but I think it was interesting what Tom said as well. Not in the same way that Boavista are for me, but this is still an important club. You often see the stadium full of fans from in the context of the Portuguese league. There was a great atmosphere in this game. They had great support. I mean, you contrast that with, again, I don't want to let my biases come through, but you contrast that with like the AVS game and things like that. When you see a club like Farense who's got a passionate fan base, and I think it is important also to talk about the kind of cultural and geographical impact of this. This is a club that's not in Lisbon, that's not in the northern region near Porto. It's in the Algarve. We don't have a lot of representation for those areas outside of, the capital and the north. And I think it is a shame that we're losing one of those clubs. Although I don't have any kind of qualms with the fact that, for most of the season, this has been on the cards because they just haven't been good enough.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think even geographically as a whole, I know Portugal in it seems quite a small country, but there's so much diversity within
Hmm.
each and every region, and that's always quite prominent within Portuguese culture. It is a shame that that doesn't quite reflect itself in footballing terms. And usually you'll see a few teams concentrated around Lisbon, and then the majority of them up north. And I think when it is like that, it is always such a shame that you do lose a team such as Farense, who represent an important part of Portugal geographically, such as Faro, Algarve,
Hmm.
and even when we lose one or two of the Madeira teams as well, it is the same sort of feeling. It does feel quite special to have a team like that and a well supported team representing that region. So I guess from that perspective, in the same way that it's sad to see such a giant like Boavista go, it's also sad to see a team like Farense go because it is part of the makeup, not just of the Portuguese league, but also Portuguese culture. And I just think it is nice for Sporting one day to be in Lisbon and make the journey to
Hmm.
Faro, or then on the off chance if for example Academica were in the division, you go into the Midlands. And it's not so much a Lisbon up north, Lisbon up north, Lisbon up north type of situation. So yeah, sad for them to go, especially given the context of their own battle for relegation. They did put up a good fight against Santa Clara, who had their own focus in terms of trying to qualify for the Conference League, which they did. No shame in losing that game for Farense, I guess, because Santa Clara have been really solid, and congratulations to them on a side as well for them to represent, as you say, another
Exactly.
important region of Portugal,
Yeah.
the Azores, in Europe as well. So it's a big moment for them too. But yeah, unfortunate for them, and I think looking at the other side of the coin, focusing on Estrela and Madura, which I'm sure we'll come to in just a moment as well. Like if you told any Estrela fan that they'd be losing 4-0 at half time, they'd be thinking like, okay, like I'll just pack my bags now. So I don't know how that sort of happened, and then they've still managed to stay up. But I mean, that's the combination of results, isn't it? Is it that works in their favour? No one else managed to do anything about it.
Mhm.
But yeah, uh, when I saw that result come in, obviously watching the tense 0-0 at the time between
Mm.
Sporting and Vitória, and there wasn't even that many other goals in other games,
No.
and then this game is just 4-0. I'm like, whoa, like what's going on? But yeah, no, quite a turn of events, for
Yeah.
sure. But yeah, unlucky for Ferenc as well as the other clubs. A little bit more fortunate for Strela, but then they put the groundwork in like beforehand and got some important results, and they stay up. So despite losing 4-0, congratulations to them.
Albert, can I
Yeah.
just say, I think Forense's biggest mistake was starting Dario Poveda in this last game, because the previous other two games, he comes on like for 3 minutes to play and he gets the winner twice, and then
So you're saying they should have brought him on?
it's just saved him for the last 5 minutes for sure. Like that's what he does. I mean,
He was too tired by the end to do his customary
honestly,
late goal.
because those two results, the Famalicão and the
Yeah.
other game, so that incredible, like Vitória, like that's incredible. That the story was written there for him to come on again, but no, yeah, they decided to start him. So,
Yeah, if there's any negative note for me, that the only thing that kind of left a sour taste in my mouth at the end of the day was the fact that the two kind of worst results, the two quite pathetic results, if we're being honest, as you say, that Estrela Amadora being 4-0 down at half time against Estoril, and then AVS losing 3-0 at home to Moreirense. And those are the two teams that get, well, obviously Estrela surviving and AVS get the lifeline. That was the only kind of the thing that didn't sit quite right with me, at least for Enzo Boavista to put up a fight. But obviously, it goes without saying that, you know, the results of these leagues come from a whole season's worth of work, not just one day. So it all works out in the end. On a more positive note, though, of course, Tom, in the Farense game, was the fact that Santa Clara qualified for Europe, and they've done it before, but they've done it again now. And Patrick's right to point out that not only for Portugal to have a team in the UEFA Conference League, but for the Azores to have European football, that's quite an exciting prospect.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he deserves so much credit, doesn't he, Vasco Matos? I mean, they were playing in the second division last season, you know, and he
With a lot of the
uh,
same players and the same
exactly.
manager, you know.
Well, that's the key point, I think, Albert. You know, they got relegated. You know, they didn't panic. They didn't like have a squad overhaul. They didn't sell their best players. They managed to keep hold of them. You know, went straight back up, and I think we saw you know, that they kind of reaped the rewards for that stability this season. You know, it's really a fantastic season. You have to say, you know, getting into Europe, great achievement. They've got some very good players there. You know, it'd be interesting, of course. One unfortunate thing, which happens quite often in Portugal, is when a team has a good season, qualifies for Europe in
Mm.
summer, you know, maybe they lose two or three of their best players, and then perhaps you know, it'd be tough for them to represent Portugal well in Europe. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Gabriel Silva, for example, gets a move abroad at some of their, you know, or to a bigger club in Portugal. Some of their defenders have really impressed me as well. That's Sydney Lima. Always seems to have a great game. Such a wholehearted player he is. And I think it's Adriano, isn't it? Also in midfield, he's impressed me a lot. So yeah, and just really well organised, just really solid team. You know, very not the most exciting team. You know, just really based on solid defence, and then you know, really quick transitions. And when I say quick, I'm sure some of you guys might have seen that bit of footage from about a week ago. That I think Gabriel Silva is officially the fastest footballer. I don't know, in Europe or in the world or something. This amazing piece of you know, footage where he just put in a sprint. I think he reached something absolutely ridiculous. Was it 40 kilometers per
40
hour
kilometers
or
an hour,
something?
apparently, yeah.
And yeah, but you know, as well as just being very fast, he's a good player. You know, he's scored a lot of goals, given a lot of assists. So yeah, really happy for the Azores. You know, it's like a few have mentioned. It's, you know, it's really great to Portugal, you know, be represented by clubs from different regions within Portugal and the islands, of course. It's a bit of a shame now. You know, Madeira, no clubs in the top flight, which is unusual. But you know, Santa Clara, you know, doing the islands proud, I suppose you can say,
Mhm.
and certainly doing themselves proud. Yeah, and hopefully you know, they do a good job in Europe.
We should give a little bit of credit to Astral, because, of course, it was a great result, and they have had a great season.
Yeah, small day season. Yeah, I'd just like to a quick shout out to Estoril, who
Mm.
yeah, of course, near Lisbon. I go to see them quite often. I've been about 5 or 6 times this season, and you know, I think it's Ian Cathro, who's the Scottish manager, who's done a fantastic job there. And it's been really interesting to see because Estoril, they're normally a club who have quite a competitive team, but quite often it's based on loan players, from Benfica, from Sporting especially. They like to loan players to Estoril, maybe because it's near, they can keep a good eye on them. So last season we had, for example, Mateus Pereira, we had Rodrigo Gomes, of course, both of them had fantastic seasons, ended up getting sold to the Premier League. But the problem is when you do that, who's really getting the benefit from those players? It's not Estoril at the end of the day. Okay, they get the benefit for a season, but then at the end of the day, they're sold, and it's their parent club who kind of gets the benefit with a nice big transfer fee. Or, if they go back to their parent club, they're a more developed player. Estoril this season, they decided not to do that. And, they had no loan players. And it started off, quite very, very iffy, you could say.
Yeah.
And it looked like Ian Cathro might not last that long because I think the first 9 games they'd only won once, and then they got knocked out of the Portuguese Cup by fourth tier side, Lusitana de Évora, who, by the way, ended up getting to the semi-finals. So perhaps it wasn't so bad after all. But yeah, he was in real trouble. But then they've just kind of, completely turned it round. And the thing which has been really pleasing to see is both collectively and individually, just a real improvement, a real steady improvement, game on game, game on game. Some of the young players, especially, the Moroccan centre forward, Yassin Begraoui, he's turned into a really good centre forward. Their centre back, Kevin Boomer, who they picked up from the French lower leagues, I think he's going to have a great career because he just impresses me every time I see him. He's really young as well, and I think he's got a really big future ahead of him. And it's great to see. And I love the way Cathro talks as well. He's super ambitious all the time. He says, I don't want us to start the season like most smaller clubs in Portugal do, saying I'll survive. Our objective is to manutenção, just to stay in the top flight. That's our objective, and then we can achieve that as soon as possible. We'll be happy. And he says he wants to change that mentality completely. He wants Estoril to be ambitious. He wants them to go for Europe. And so the thing which I think makes that quite exciting is because it's got a young squad. Like I say, almost all the players have improved. Collectively, they're definitely improved. But perhaps more important than anything, it shows that Cathro himself seems to really, be all in, and he'll be there for another season. And it's quite unusual in Portugal for managers to stay at these size of clubs, for more than one season, especially if they have a successful season, a relatively successful season. So, yeah, I'm really pleased the way it's gone for Estoril, and I think they could be, one to really keep an eye on next season.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it was apt that was probably their best performance as well of the whole season in the league on the last day of the season, which I think is quite symbolic of, as you say, the growth that they've had, and to come from a place where I think it was borderline whether Cathro would even lose his job at one point earlier in the league. So
for sure.
a real testament to them that they stuck with him and they are where they are now, which is on the back of a great season. But gentlemen, I think we will leave it there and draw the curtain on another Primeira Liga season. It's been an incredible ride. 34 weeks of great football, great drama, great storylines. When you look back to some of the things that happened at the start of the season, it feels so long ago. But yes, we did it. I would like to say a huge thank you, of course, take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to everyone who's listened over the course of this season, whether that's one episode or every week. It's incredible that people tune into the show and appreciate what we do. So we're very appreciative of that, myself and Barney. And of course, we should say a big thank you to our 3 guests today, Tom, Andrew and Patrick, and to all the guests who've joined us over the course of the season. Myself and Barney will be back next week with a kind of award show that we do every year. So definitely tune in for that. Best player, best manager, all that kind of good stuff will be decided next week. But yeah, gentlemen, I think I'll leave it there and just say a huge thank you for joining us. And yeah, we'll see you on another podcast very soon.